Hello everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 25th of August. Today we're going to be looking at the Battle of Robotyne, Ukraine's capture of the village. We're going to look at the aftermath of that battle and what could be next. And as I said in my last video, I'm not really into predicting the future that much, so I'm going to keep it on a more localized scale. I'm not going to be looking at, larger cities like Tokmak or anything like that. We're just going to keep it in the areas around Robotyne and just base it off of the map, base it off of the fortifications, and off of reports that are coming in from the Russian and Ukrainian side. But let's first look at what actually happened around Robotyne. And what I'll say is that around August 23rd, that's what I've seen as a consensus as when Ukraine finally secured Robotyne. I was pretty busy over the past few days, so I wasn't able to cover it that much. But it's also good because I was able to wait a few days before we got confirmation through geolocations and videos that were posted. Now we have a lot of geolocated footage of Ukrainian presence in the southern part of the village. But I will say, to be fair to the Russian side, a lot of these videos are recorded in the same area around the southeastern corner of Robotyne, and I haven't seen really any videos from the southwestern. So I've seen some Russian maps that are still claiming that Russia holds on to the southwestern part of Robotyne even now on August 25th. And a lot of them are saying that they're still fighting on the outskirts of Robotyne, which would be, to the north of the trench system, which Russia controls. This is the trench system. So by outskirts, I believe the definition of outskirts of Robotyne would be the area in between those trenches and the area in between these streets over here. So it would be in between these two parallel lines. But generally, what we've seen from videos and also from multiple different sources like Syriac Maps, he's also updated his map. I believe it was 2 days ago actually. It's confirming that Robotyne is under Ukrainian control, and all the videos as well. I have them linked over here. A lot of people saying that I don't have my videos linked. They're all over here. You could see them. And if you want to get basically a compilation of hundreds of different geolocated videos, all of them are over here on my map. You have to click on the geolocated section. I have it hidden because there's so many markers over there. But anyway, let's look into the units that were involved in this attack. So the final capture in the videos sort of corroborate this was done by the 47th Mechanized Brigade, which is one of the units that really was at the forefront of the attacks on Robotyne for the past 71 days, because that's how long the battle lasted. And in addition to the 47th, you had the Scala Intelligence Battalion that was very involved in clearing out the southern part of the town, and they were also aided by the 73rd Naval Special Operations Center. I believe that's what it's called. They were previously stationed around Ochakiv, but they were moved towards Zaporizhia to help with the counteroffensive. So really, if we look out and zoom out for a second and look at the entire Orikhiv axis, you see there's a huge concentration of Ukrainian forces in this area. A huge chunk of Ukraine's counteroffensive strike force, which includes, the 9th, 10th Army Corps, it includes the Maroon Tactical Grouping, and many other brigades from the National Guard and mechanized forces, all these drone units that there's so many of them, I can't even count all of them. They were all concentrated around the the city of Orikhiv and its suburbs in order to find a weak point in Russia's line of contact, in essence, because you do see on the map that the Russians do have a lot of trenches on the line of contact. And that was sort of meant to extend the amount of time that the fighting lasted at the line of contact before it reached Russia's more prepared lines of defenses. And when we look at the next line of defense, which the Ukrainians are now pretty close to with the fall of Robotyne, it would be the one that I'm going over in red. But that's not to really discount all of the other trench lines that were built to the north of it. Those were built in what has been dubbed the security zone, which is about a 6 kilometer area that is between the line of contact and the Russian defensive line that I just went over. And you could see on over here, I'll show the distances. At most, it could be actually about 14, 15 kilometers in certain areas. And then around Robotyne, it's closer to about 4 or 5 kilometers away from the front line. And so the entire Ukrainian goal was to find a way to break through the line of contact and then find a way to actually reach that first line of defense. They have not been able to reach it yet. You could say technically they've almost reached it around Verbove, but it's just going to be very difficult for them to attack Verbove head on at the current moment because of how fortified it is with those two lines of defense on a local level, two trench lines that have to be overrun. There's also, anti-tank ditches and all of that. So attacking it head on is definitely going to be difficult. But if you look to the south, there is the village of Novoprokopivka, which is the final town, final village, you could say, that's in between the Ukrainian lines and the Russian lines before reaching that line of defense. And so that is certainly an area that Russia is defending now. A lot of Russia's forces that retreated, they were concentrated in this village and in the trenches to the north of it. You could see that the Russians still have control of this trench system that is to the north of Novoprokopivka. It's located on a hill. This hill overlooks the center of Robotyne, so it does give the Russians some good firing positions to attack the Ukrainian forces that are now congregating in Robotyne. So it is going to be difficult to assault it head on. At the same time, the Ukrainians do have a presence in the eastern fields that are on the eastern flank of Robotyne. This is an area that Ukraine has been able to solidify control over, afforestations in this eastern flank. They've solidified control over trench systems in this area. And we are already seeing the Ukrainians trying to push even further south in this direction because there is a relative open area for the next 2 to 3 kilometers in this area. And then you could see perhaps Ukrainians try to flank Novoprokopivka. That would be perhaps a better idea than attacking the trench system over here head on, although they might also do that. They might be firing artillery at it already. So there's artillery duels going on in this area. But just to go back and highlight the immense amount of Ukrainian units that were involved in the 71-day battle, which is crazy. 71-day battle for this village, which if we look at the size, I'll just do it quickly over here, at most would be at around 5 square kilometers. So it's a very small area, 71 days of battles for that, and probably a huge amount of casualties, both to personnel and to equipment. So let's look at the units that were involved on both sides. And I didn't really go into depth about the amount of men in each one. I just did some quick math in my head. So in a later date, I'll actually do a Twitter thread where I explain all of the troop concentrations in the Zaporizhia axis. But for now, this is just a pretty rough estimate. So on the Ukrainian side, you have the 47th Mechanized Brigade, which we mentioned before, 65th Mechanized Brigade. Then you have these other units from the 10th Army Corps, including the 116th Mechanized Brigade, 117th, and 118th Mechanized Brigades. You have Scala Intelligence Unit, which is a battalion within the 10th Army Corps. You have the 78th Hertz Regiment. This unit over here, I just added it in. I was not aware of its existence, but it was mentioned by Ukrainian sources as a unit that was involved in the Battle of Robotyne. You also had, as I said before, 73rd Naval Special Operations Center, and then you have the air assault battalions or air assault brigades that were moved in from the Maroon Tactical Grouping, and they were previously in reserve. You have 82nd Air Assault Brigade and then 46th Air Mobile Brigade that was already at the front line for a while. So here are those two units. And you have 71st Jaeger Brigade. You have National Guard brigades, including the Spartan National Guard Brigade, the 14th National Guard Brigade, which I believe is located over here, but I might have moved it because it really should be around the Orikhiv axis. And then there's also the 15th National Guard Brigade that was also stationed in this area. And a unit that I was aware of fighting on the front lines that wasn't mentioned by Ukrainian sources was the 33rd Mechanized Brigade. For some reason, it was not listed among the brigades that was involved, even though we do know for sure that I was fighting. So you have about, maybe 11, 12 brigades that were involved in the, not really just the Battle of Robotyne, but generally stationed across the entire Orikhiv axis, which is a broader area. If we just visualize that, you'll see it's generally this area. So it's a wide area, but still pretty concentrated. So within that region, you have perhaps, if the brigades were at full strength, which they're not, I'm just telling you out of the gate, these brigades are not at full strength, neither for the Russians or for the Ukrainians. If they were, then generally you'd assume that the Ukrainians in this area, which I'll circle, have about 50,000 men. But I would say that it could be much less than that. It could be 30,000, it could be 35,000, maybe even 25,000 as a lower end guess. So this is just a general number for now, but just to give you an idea of the amount of brigades that were involved, and just think of how many could have been used elsewhere, stretched out. but this is the way that Ukrainians try to go about. This was a general operational strategy in this region to try to reach that main defensive line. Then on the Russian side, if we look at the Russian units, and what I will say is that it is harder to get a specific amount of Russian units because I come from the West. I have these English sources that are giving very in-depth analysis of Ukrainian brigades, and there's a lot of geolocated footage of those Ukrainian brigades. So when I don't give a specific number of Russian forces, that's not out of malice. That's just because it's actually harder to get information on them. And I'm being serious about that. Obviously, you can get information about the ones that are fighting on the front line, but it's harder to get information on newly formed units, reserve units, stuff like that. So it is harder, and that's why the range is also larger in terms of the amount of men that they have fighting in this region. But what I will say is that they have many different brigades and regiments involved. The Russians, they have the Tsar Wolf's PMC, the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade. They have the 291st Motor Rifle Regiment, 56th and 108th Air Assault Regiments, 503rd Motor Rifle Regiment, 6th Motor Rifle Brigade. They have the BARS units. Those are reserve units that were created, and they've been moved to the front line. They are probably, you could say, less well equipped and less trained than some of these other units, like the VDV units, for instance. But you have BARS 3, BARS 14, BARS 11, BARS 1 fighting around this general area. You have the 100th Reconnaissance Brigade. You have the 22nd Special Purpose Brigade, Spetsnaz Brigade, and also the 45th Special Purpose Brigade. You have the 70th Motor Rifle Regiment, the 291st and 292nd Artillery Brigades were also located in this general region. And that should give you a rundown, but there's also other brigades and especially regiments that I don't have a logo for, but they're also located on the front line. They have a presence, but there's not much known about their information. There's not a lot of, at least Western information about them. So the numbers could actually be higher for the amount of Russian forces that are generally stationed around the Orikhiv axis. But from just what I did, the quick math I did, it would range from about 30,000 to 80,000 men. And that's a huge range, probably somewhere in between. But yeah, I'll do more in depth later. Now, just to talk about the implications, but first look at really the movement of the 7th Air Assault Division. The 7th Air Assault Division is a division that is obviously this VDV units. They were moved into Robotyne around last week, maybe a couple of days ago actually, and they actually counterattacked for the Russians. They launched a counterattack, and they were able to take back, you could say, part of the center of the village. And this was for a very short period of time, it seems, just to hold the line, just enough to allow the rest of the Russian reinforcements in the southern part of the village to withdraw. So that's why those reinforcements were sent in. And then that's when the Russians fully withdrew. So there was talk of a Russian counterattack, but that was really just to allow the Russian forces to leave. And that includes the 56th and 108th Air Assault Regiments. They were moved in very recently to help conduct this operation, and they're a part of the 7th Division. But now that Ukrainians control Robotyne, this is not the end, as we previously talked about. The Ukrainian forces in this area, due to their large concentration, do have the ability to rotate forces in and out, which does allow them to recuperate and to actually move in reinforcements. Now, the thing is, with the movement of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade, there's not many reserve brigades, at least mechanized ones, that could be moved in anymore to help continue launching exploitation attacks past Robotyne. So the Ukrainians will have to rely more on their existing pool of resources which exists within the Orikhiv axis. I said in my last video, there's probably around 6 more mechanized brigades that Ukraine has access to that are in reserve. So maybe we'll see some of those moved in the future. But for now, I think that we're going to see a lot of the 82nd Brigade, because that brigade was very, very recently moved in. It was moved in to help with the final push into Robotyne, and now they do still have a pretty high capability. They still have a lot of equipment. A few strikers were destroyed, but they do still have most of their strikers. I believe they have 90 strikers, but I actually saw on this American sheets where they listed all of the resources they sent to Ukraine. They said that they committed to send 189 strikers to Ukraine. So maybe that number increased, but those have not been shipped yet probably. So the 82nd has access to strikers, have access to martyrs, have access to Challenger 2s. Challenger 2s, we've seen them on the front line now for a couple of days. There's some footage of them that's been coming out, but it is a new revelation. So they haven't been that engaged on the battlefield, but maybe now we'll see the 82nd start to use them even more. And I believe the 82nd has about 14 Challenger 2 tanks. Those tanks are good for an area like Robotyne and generally the entire Zaporizhia front actually, because the battle the battlefield over here consists of a lot of open fields. It consists of a lot of these unpaved roads. There are not many roads that you can rely on, so you have to go through more less traditional paths to attack, and that's good for the Challenger 2 because it's good with maneuverability. It's good with its cross country abilities, and that's good with an area like the open fields where it is more difficult to go long distances. The terrain is obviously more difficult to go past than a paved road. So just keep that in mind. Also, the Americans, they are planning to send 31 Abrams tanks, and those are from the older iteration. They want to send the M1A1 model, and that will probably take another month. They want to bring them to Ukraine by September. That's the goal or the estimate. So I'll have to see if those begin being used on the battlefield as well. And so this is not the end of the counteroffensive. I think that it's moving into a new stage where the Ukrainians will be trying to find an area really around their Robotyne sector that would allow them to break through the first, or not really first, but one of the defensive lines, probably the main defensive line at the moment. And so just keep an eye out for that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.